All right, so we're going to start off with the Bellringer for today. Just had a current event. Haley, great job with that. We will assign someone else towards the end of class. So Bellringer. So detail the importance of the Navajo code talkers. Describe the significance of the Battle of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. There we go. There we go. Oop, there it is. Hey, Haley. Hey, Ethan. Just working on the Bellringer. All right, thanks. No Angel today? Do I see her? No? All right. Ethan, you all right for a current event next week? All right, cool. I'll change it out. Put it up right forward now.
Mary's rushing.
What's up, buddy?
Mary's rushing.
Yeah, go ahead. Well, how's the meeting today? Haley and Ethan, pretty good? Get a lot accomplished? Yeah, cool. I'll give you another minute to finish up here. You guys watch a new episode of Falcon Winter Soldier? No?
Good.
I watched it this morning, bright and early.
For the gym.
Well, I don't work out on Fridays. Actually, I haven't really done anything since Easter. I got to get back into it. Being lazy, man.
I'll take the super soldier serum.
Yeah, about it. Yeah, get me jacked up. All right, so let's go over this real quick. Navajo code talkers. Who are they? Why are they important during World War II? What do we have? What we got here? Go ahead, Chris. Kiss today, huh?
Yep.
Nice shirt. I like it. Go ahead.
The importance of the Navajo code talkers was that they used their own native language through radio and telephone to report Japan. The language is so unknown that the Japanese can never break it forever.
Yeah, good job. Good job. So this was a language, obviously, in the United States, Native American language, in America, way before the United States even. And we decided, well, might as well use this language to hide codes and hide our strategies that are broadcasted across the Pacific and even on the battlefields. And this was a great way to hide communications, disguise it so the Japanese can't hack it, can never break into our strategies or plans, our codes that are sent out across the Pacific. So this was very useful for the United States. And There's a report out, obviously people trying to hack it and trying to break this code. They didn't do it until 1968, so far after World War II. But it was really interesting. We might as well use a language that we have had in in America for a long period of time. Not many people know it, obviously, even in the U.S., but Japan especially, they couldn't break this code, and this was very useful for the United States. And it really just shows the diversity in the United States. We have so many ethnic groups, so many cultures, so many religions, languages, and we might as well use it, right? To help us on the battlefield, help us with this war. All right, good job, good job. So, Battle of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. What do we have? What do we have? Ethan, what do you have? You get that part? Chris, go ahead. Let's finish it off here.
Battle of Iwo Jima and Okinawa was significant. This is when the USA Marine Corps for island hopping until they eventually got to mainland Japan and finally sent down atomic bomb.
Great, good job, good job. So yesterday we talked about this quite a bit, and this was a part of the island hopping technique, the island hopping strategy the United States had to try to push back Imperial Japan out in the Pacific. So Japan, we all know, okay, they had a very, very far expansion ever since the 1930s. And that red line signifies the extent of the Japanese control up until 1941, 1942. And what was that turning point in the Pacific? What was that battle? Do you remember? It used to be a grocery store in Higgins, Valley View. Go ahead. You know it. I know you do. It's an island.
Midway?
Yeah, Midway. Yeah, good job. Midway, right? The Midway Islands, Midway Battle, right? That was the turning point in the Pacific where the United States, from here on out, since 1942, end of 1941, right? This was pushing back, 1942. This was pushing back the Japanese back to their main borders. And you can see with those blue arrows there, that really signifies the United States and how they jumped island to island, pushing back the Japanese. And the last two major islands close to the border of Japan, close to the island of Japan, are Iwo Jima and Okinawa. These battles happen really simultaneously, right? They happen right after each other. And Iwo Jima, what was so significant about that? What famous picture arose from that battle? You guys remember? Cody? Yeah, they're raising the flag. Good job. Good job. And these islands were heavily defended, okay? There are bunkers, tunnels, okay, hidden artillery, traps all throughout the island to try to prevent the United States from taking these two islands. It was really vital, okay? It was really important for the Japanese to hold on to them because if the United States would obviously capture these two islands, that would really signify the end of the war. Japan would take a lot of bombing runs from the United States if these two islands were captured. And the United States, after a long struggle, right, because the Japanese would never surrender. There's a reason why there's no prisoners of war after these battles, because the Japanese would continue to fight. No surrender. Kamikaze attacks, right? Literally running out in open with bombs strapped to them, trying to take out as many American soldiers and troops as possible. Their fighter planes diving into many of these battleships and aircraft carriers out in the open water. They were literally fighting to the death. They would never surrender. It was a part of their culture. And this was an example to the United States. Well, if we try to invade the mainland of Japan, who knows how many casualties there could be. There could be millions of American deaths, right? American soldiers. And I told that story yesterday about my grandfather. Really hit home for me. It's like, you know what? Maybe atomic weapons were obviously the best decision. Some people argue that maybe we shouldn't have used the atomic weapons. In other words, it ended the war early, which we'll talk about today. But Okinawa, Iwo Jima, these last two islands, right, these last two locations before the United States would drop the atomic weapons on Japan and end the war. Okay. Is there any questions on those two battles? It's a part of the island hopping technique, right? The strategy. Get close as you can to Japan, restrict them, and prevent them from obviously expanding out. We know Japan is an island. If you take away the resources, take away their islands, right? They'll have limited resources and raw materials, which will eventually push them to defeat. What's up, Chris?
many bombs? How many people died from bombs?
We'll talk about it today. Jumping a little early, right? Jumping the gun. There's actually more deaths and casualties and civilian losses in the fire bombings of Tokyo than the two bombs. I wouldn't say combined, but both the atomic weapons. Really just showed that we were going to really bomb and submit them to death, right? Until they surrender. And Tokyo really took a lot of fire bombings, which actually accumulated to more deaths than the atomic weapons in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Interesting, right? Interesting. All right, is there any questions on that? You guys good? Okay, all right, moving on today. I think I only have 2 vocab terms. That's it. The rest I'll cover in the slides. So we have Manhattan Project and the Trinity test. There we go. Trinity Mummer. She was here. She would have appreciated that term, I guess, right? Also, we're finishing up the chapter here. So next week, prepare for a test, right? Exam. I'm thinking mid next week to late because I got to go over the Holocaust yet, right? I got to talk about Japanese internment camps. And I got to introduce the Cold War, right? I got to talk about the Yalta Conference and the Potsdam Conference, which shouldn't take long, but I'm thinking mid next week to late. And we'll move on with the Cold War. And then I guess you could say the final, right? I'm sure you guys all
To do with us taking a test. I don't understand.
I don't know. Anyway, anywho. So the last exam, guys, the last assessment will be everything from, you listen, Cody? The last exam will be everything from the Cold War, or we're going to be talking about late next week to the end of the year, right?
Like
The Cold War, yeah, it's going to be the last chapter test, okay? So it's not going to be anything really from the chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, so don't worry about that, okay? I'll get into the civil rights movement, obviously. Talk mostly about the Cold War up until we get to the wars on terror as well. So it will be somewhat of a longer test, but we should be okay. Maybe I'll break it up into 2 days since we'll be here. Those days, usually we have an open campus. That's one thing we're going to miss, right? Finals week, the open campus.
You when you're done with your assignments.
Yeah. All right, so Manhattan Project, what do we have? Andrew, what do you have, buddy?
The Manhattan Project was a research and development undertaking during World War II that produced the first nuclear weapons. It was led by the United States with the support of the United Kingdom and Canada.
All right, good job. So Manhattan Project, the secret plan to try to develop an atomic weapon, right? So towards the end of the war, we would later gather some of these Nazi scientists to help us with the atomic weapon, and later with travel to the moon with missiles and rocket power, jet engines, you name it. But Manhattan Project started right around the start of the war, 1939, okay? And will later obviously conclude in 1945 when we test the first atomic weapon out in the middle of the desert, New Mexico, Los Alamos, New Mexico. Trinity test, which leads into the next term. So what is the Trinity test? Cody, go ahead.
It was a code name for the first detonation of the nuclear.
Yeah, good job, good job. So all this work that was put in with this Manhattan Project, okay, this was the first atomic bomb blast set off in world history, right? Out in New Mexico, remote location. And the scientists obviously wanted to test out, see if this atomic weapon would work. They had no idea what could occur, right? They thought that they would crack the crust of the Earth, and the Earth would just blow up in flames. They thought maybe the atomic blast would destroy the atmosphere, and everybody in the world would perish. or they thought it was going to be a dud. Didn't think it was going to work. And if it was a dud, what do you think would happen to all those scientists, all those people that worked on the atomic weapon? They'd probably be trialed and put to jail, maybe even executed. Because if these types of plans, these ideas got out to the opposing forces like Japan or before, right, to Germany, who knows, right, what could have happened? They would have gathered up these ideas about the atomic weapon. So it was very crucial that this worked. And they had no idea what kind of blast it would get from it. But it was successful. The Earth's crust and crack in the atmosphere probably took a little bit of radiation, but everybody in the world was fine, I guess you could say. But there was fear afterwards, right? You never know what could happen when these atomic weapons could be set off. Luckily, there's only 2 bombs that were exploded on humans, right? On civilians, and we'll talk about them today. Okay, all right, so there you go, Manhattan Project Trinity test. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. I have a few videos. There's a really good one. They kind of reenact the Trinity test, and Oppenheimer, the man that came up who was in charge of it, he talks a lot about how the responsibility, right, I guess you could say, the people, when you look back at it, who you can blame for it, falls onto him. He calls himself the destroyer of worlds. Oh, maybe he's taking it too hard himself. I don't know. But he came up with this plan, this bomb, changed the world forever. All right, so the Manhattan Project, atomic bomb developed, secret project, July 16th, 1945, is where the bomb would be tested, out in the middle of the desert, a remote location. As you can see, these people all gathered around, taking notes. Obviously, many people were in bunkers as well to protect themselves from maybe the shock waves or the blast itself. They're taking notes on it. They're filming it. And some of the film actually is lost today. Is lost. A lot of it's because the film that they used after some time would deteriorate. And it is what it is. But most of it's saved. They can still find the blast. They can see exactly, how destructive it really was. And yeah, so there are some pictures of that blast back in 1945 out in the middle of the desert. But anyway, they called it the Manhattan Project because a lot of the ideas, the planning, I guess you say the chemistry involved, the science involved was done in Long Island, Manhattan, right? New York City. Because if these plans get out to the wrong people, spies, that could cause a lot of issues for the United States, for freedom, right? Against the Allied powers, this could be terrible if anybody got their hands on this from the Axis powers. So they moved it out to the remote location, New Mexico, right? Part of it, they're trying to create Captain America, right? Super soldiers here. Yeah. But anyway, the Manhattan Project, Oppenheimer is going to lead the study. And like I mentioned, I'll have a video here for you. Really just expresses his view and his perspective after he saw the blast. At first, he was very excited, right? He goes, oh, this test work. This atomic weapon is going to bring peace and end the war in World War II. And they wanted to plan to drop it on Germany, but since they were defeated, since they surrendered, we could then test it and use it on Japan, especially a country that's never going to surrender or give up, right? So Oppenheimer, he was very happy about the explosion. Obviously, there's a lot of things on the line if this didn't work. Like I mentioned, they could be trialed, they could be put to jail for the rest of their lives for the knowledge they have of this type of weapon. Given to the wrong people, who knows what could happen. So after the explosion, he was very excited, but then all of a sudden, his mentality shifted. It changed. It's like, this is going to change the world and warfare forever. Right, this type of bomb, obviously, this was the beginning of it. Later, there's these explosions. These explosions are going to be 10 times the mass of what they tested out in the middle of the desert. Okay, and he knew that if this was used the wrong ways, obviously this could end humanity, end civilization. So he described himself almost as like the angel of death, right? He talked to himself about the angel of death, which in some cases is pretty accurate. All right, so dropping the bomb, August 6th, 1945, we decided, well, with the taking of Okinawa and Iwo Jima, we lost a lot of casualties, a lot of men, a lot of soldiers, okay, with these invasion of these islands. And Truman, who's now president after FDR died, was given the secrets to this plan. He was vice president under FDR, and he didn't even know that this project was underway. Can you imagine that? The second man in line in the United States had no clue this project was going on since the beginning of the war. So Truman was like, wait, this was going on under my kind of his leadership. He was second in charge this whole time. They're like, yeah, we had to keep it secret, even from the man second in line, the vice president. What's that? Yeah, he knew. He knew. He knew.
Isn't the president nowadays, the president's the only one with the nuclear code?
I wouldn't say he's the only one, but he's the one who decides whether or not. Yeah, that should be. But we'll get to in 1962. There was a decision made by JFK and the Soviet Union to say, hey, we're done testing these atomic weapons because after the Tsar Bomba, which was the largest explosion in human history that the Soviets actually tested, they decided, well, this isn't good with the radiation, the atmosphere, the environment. This could cause a lot of deaths if this radiation leaked out to the rest of the world, right? So they decided, well, we're done with these testings, okay? You can kind of understand what science is today of what these explosions could do. So we'll talk about it when we get to that point, though. All right, so August 6th, 1945, Hiroshima, 60,000 dead instantly. Bang, done. The Enola Gay is the plane that dropped the atomic weapon. And his name's Colonel Tibbets. He talks a little bit about the explosion and how they dropped the bomb and tried to escape as fast as they could. And many of them thought it was a dud. As it was falling to the ground, it took about a minute, 45 seconds for it to explode when they dropped it. And as they're flying away, they're like, oh, must have been a dud. Didn't work. And all of a sudden, this blast happened. In many cases, it blinded a few men on the plane for a short period of time, okay, and shook the plane, the aftershocks of it, okay, the blast of it, the sheer explosion itself shook the plane, and they actually made it home successful, and it changed their view, it changed their, I guess you could say, perspective of the war instantly. They just knew what they just did killed 60,000 people. Unbelievable, right? But Japan wasn't going to surrender. Japan was never going to surrender. So even after this atomic weapon, we had to drop another atomic bomb. And we had it planned out until they would eventually surrender. We weren't going to invade. Right? Truman already put it out there that the United States were not going to risk any more of our soldiers with this war, with this costly invasion, and Japanese citizens and civilians. There's going to be a lot of killings, far worse than actually what we see here when we go through the tests of it and when we go through some of the simulations, right? So August 9th, 3 days after the Nagasaki explosion. So it was actually aimed for a different city, but since it was really cloudy, since it was the weather conditions, they decided to drop it over Nagasaki, a little bit of a smaller city, okay? And it ended up in a valley, kind of like this, right? In a valley, and it didn't kill as many people, but it still caused a lot of destruction, right? And still, after this bombing, many of the Japanese military officials wanted to continue to fight. They didn't want to surrender. And it actually fell on Hirohito, the emperor, and he believed that this was it, right? He needed to surrender. He didn't want to try to cause any more deaths to his own people. And there was actually a coup, there you go, to kill Hirohito. The Japanese military officials wanted to try to start a rebellion within Japan to assassinate him, to overthrow his power, because he wanted to surrender. He wanted to give up. It was going against the code that Japanese had, their culture of never surrender. And luckily, Hirohito did surrender because we had more atomic weapons to drop on Japan. All right, I can talk about the atomic weapons forever. But here are some pictures of the devastation of the atomic weapons Obviously, the blast of it evaporated many people, buildings, areas, locations all throughout Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There's actually some pictures, really shocking, of the atomic weapons and how one man witnessed a shadow, just a shadow blasted on to a wall, blast on kind of the wall that was destroyed of a building, and his shadow is imprinted there, I think still today, from the atomic weapon. And it was kind of more of like a memorial to what happened, what occurred. They described some of the radiation of many of the people kind of away from the blast and how hot the blast really was. And obviously the radiation melting the skin off of many people, as you can see in these pictures here to the right. There was a description of a man, because of how hot the water, or how hot the blast really was, he tried to cool off into a river. And when he walked in the river was obviously really hot and boiling. And he came out, his skin was just peeled off, and kind of survived for a little bit of time and died. But it was just a sheer destruction, right? A new thing that's been introduced to war that will change warfare forever. All right, so I'll move on later with the Holocaust. We'll talk about that afterwards. But the atomic weapons, their significance, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, make sure you guys remember it. Okay. That being said, I'll show you some videos. But before I do that, because I have the recording up, I want to show you your assignment. It's not going to take long, I promise. It's pretty interesting, actually, the decisions that Truman had. So all I want you to do is just read these options. That's it. So there's 5 options. That's it. And I want you to go through the pros and cons of each option. Okay, so just say option 1. This was U.S. invasion of Japanese home islands. And you're just going to label the pros to it and the cons to it. And you're going to roll through each option. There's just 5 of them. That's it. All right. So after you're done with that, just hold off for now. Okay, I'll have an assignment later for you next week, but I don't want to pile you with a lot of work for the weekend. So just go through those options, label the pros and cons. That's all I'm looking for right now. All right, with that being said, I have a few videos to show you. Those of you at home, please attach your bell ringers. Please complete this assignment for Monday.